from a world of preconceived notions to the truth. When you spread out a world map, can you immediately pinpoint which country loves Singapore the most enthusiastically? Even the Philippines, often called a close friend of Singapore, shows a remarkable 95% affinity. But an OECD member nation has topped even that with a shocking figure. The moment you hear the name of that country, you will be surprised, and your heart will be warmed. This is not just an announcement of rankings. This is a story of rebirth, where an American journalist, who once declared, "I despise Singapore," travels across the globe, melting her frozen heart with tears. Why is the world so captivated by Singapore? And what about the unexpected reactions from its neighbors? When you discover the answers, your perception of Singapore is bound to change dramatically starting today. Are you ready? What is the top country chosen by the world for its high affinity towards Singapore? The results are astonishing, a heartwarming international story. Startling statistics have emerged. Which country in the world loves Singapore the most? The Philippines, for instance, exhibits an astounding 95% affinity. But among the world's wealthiest nations, the OECD member countries, which one ranks number one? If you knew which country it was, you might collapse from sheer astonishment. You might even change your travel plans for tomorrow immediately. And what about that neighboring country? That too yielded a surprising result. We are about to follow the report of a CNN American journalist detailing how much the people of the world love Singapore. Before we begin, if you could leave a comment saying, "I love Singapore," it might encourage even more people around the world to enthusiastically embrace our nation. I am Claire Fisher, a journalist who has worked for 20 years in the international department of CNN, an American news organization. One day, in 2021, my editor-in-chief called me in and assigned me a rather peculiar investigation. "Claire," she said, "find the country with the highest affinity for Singapore across the globe, focusing primarily on OECD member nations." In that instant, my body stiffened. Merely hearing the word Singapore brought a tightness to my chest. 20 years ago, my father tragically passed away in a traffic accident while on a business trip to Singapore. I was 25 years old at the time, and my father was my only family. Why did he have to travel to such a distant country of all places? Since that day, Singapore had been a cold, terrifying place for me. I avoided news related to Singapore and quickened my pace whenever I passed by stores selling Singaporean products. However, the editor-in-chief's order was absolute. Reluctantly, I began sifting through data, and the first figure that caught my eye sent a shockwave through me. Philippines, 95%. I couldn't believe it was real. It meant that 95 out of every 100 Filipinos loved Singapore. Thailand, 94.8%. Malaysia, 93.2%. Indonesia, 91.7%. The entire Southeast Asian region seemed captivated by Singapore. I immediately boarded a flight to Manila. The moment I disembarked at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, signs in English and Tagalog referencing Singapore's success stories caught my eye. Taxi drivers, hotel staff, and street vendors alike were all talking about Singapore. "I watch Singaporean dramas. I love them," said Anya, a 23-year-old university student, her eyes gleaming. "Singapore gives us hope. It shows us how a small nation, rising from humble beginnings, can achieve such incredible prosperity and stability." In that moment, I felt something was amiss. This was so different from the Singapore I knew, the one I had constructed in my mind. From Anya's expression, I sensed her genuine feelings. There was no exaggeration, only a true affection for Singapore. As I walked through the streets of Manila, I found myself in a state of confusion. The heart that had harbored such resentment for Singapore was beginning to waver, ever so slightly. Yet, I still couldn't be certain. This was merely the beginning. Upon returning from the Philippines, I seriously delved into the OECD country rankings for affinity towards Singapore. I decided to start from the lowest, 11th place. It was a neighboring Asian country. Arriving at the capital's airport, I felt a strange sensation. Despite being one of the closest countries to Singapore, its affinity rating was only 35%. This meant that more than 6 out of 10 people did not hold positive feelings for Singapore. I walked through a bustling commercial district. There were stalls selling Singaporean food products and shops displaying fashionable Singaporean clothing. However, people's expressions were complex. "I like Singaporean culture. The food is fantastic," a 55-year-old businessman mumbled hesitantly. "But the historical issues, they are hard to overcome. These are stories from our grandparents' generation." I could read a sense of regret in his eyes. a complex emotion, wanting to like it, but unable to fully embrace it. However, the younger generation was different. I met Gia, a 21-year-old university student at a local university, who conversed with me in fluent English, spiced with some Malay phrases. I've been learning about Singapore's history and its unique governance for 3 years, Gia's eyes shone. I even follow their urban planning initiatives closely. We cannot choose our past, but we can build our future. I want to create better relations with our Singaporean friends. Her words struck a chord deep within me. I felt ashamed in the face of the maturity shown by this 21-year-old university student. Had I also been fixated solely on the past? As I waited for the high-speed rail at the station, I pondered this. Here too, the younger generation held a fondness for Singapore. If so, what about other countries? My curiosity grew. That night, in my hotel room, I gazed at my father's photograph. The anger from that day, 20 years ago, was slowly fading, but I was not yet ready to forgive. When I landed at Mexico City International Airport, I was surprised. In the departure area's duty-free shops, there was a dedicated section for Singaporean snacks and unique souvenirs. Mexico's affinity for Singapore was 71%, more than double that of the previous country. What could have caused such a difference? In the taxi, heading into Mexico City, the driver, Miguel, told me, "Have you heard of Singaporean dramas? My wife watches them every day. I started watching too, and they're truly captivating." Miguel was a typical mid-50s Mexican man. It was intriguing that he watched Singaporean dramas. Singaporeans truly value family, don't they? Very similar to us Mexicans. I walked along Reforma Avenue. Everywhere, I encountered elements of Singaporean culture. Cosmetic stores displayed Singaporean beauty products, and restaurants offered modern Singaporean fusion cuisine. I met Carlos, a culture reporter for El Universal, a prominent Mexican newspaper. He appraised Singapore thus: "Singapore is an amazing country that possesses both rich tradition and cutting-edge technology. It's the future we aspire to." Listening to Carlos's words, I realized something profound. The way Europeans, now Mexicans, viewed Singapore was completely different from what I had imagined. For them, Singapore was an object of admiration. I met students at the National Autonomous University of Mexico who were studying about Singapore. Maria, 22, introduced herself in Spanish. "Hola, soy María. Me encanta la cultura de Singapur." Her pronunciation was quite accurate. Surprised, I asked her, "Why did you start learning about Singapore?" I found its charm while watching Singaporean documentaries about their urban development and multicultural harmony. "The more I learn, the more profound Singapore's depth becomes," she replied. That night in my hotel room, I was in a complex emotional state. The love for Singapore that the Mexican people had shown me was so pure. I felt how narrow my own prejudices had been. It was strange that so many people loved the country where my father had died, but a corner of my heart felt warm. When I arrived at Rome Fiumicino Airport, I was tired. This was already my fourth country, yet my passion for the investigation did not wane. Italy's affinity for Singapore was 71.2%, placing it ninth. In a cafe in central Rome, I met Francesco, a doctor, who shared an impressive story. "I remember when the pandemic hit," he recounted. "When all of Europe was plunged into chaos, Singapore's response was truly remarkable." Francesco was a seasoned doctor in his late 50s. "We thought we had so much to learn from Singapore. Their disciplined actions, consideration for others, clean environment, everything was impeccable." From Italy, I traveled to Sweden. Stockholm's affinity for Singapore was 72.8%, putting it 8th. Lars, a diplomat I met in Sweden, told me a unique story. Sweden has observed Singapore's growth since its early days as an independent nation. "We are one of the Western countries that witnessed its miracle of rising from the ashes most closely." A sense of pride was evident in Lars's eyes. "Singapore's miracle is also a source of hope for us. That's why it is a special country." Next, I arrived in Berlin, Germany. Germany's affinity for Singapore was 73.8%, ranking it 7th. In front of the German Historical Museum, Professor Heinz, a historian, uttered moving words. "Germany and Singapore have both experienced the pain of rebuilding after great challenges. We both rose from humble beginnings." Professor Heinz was an elderly man in his 70s. A deep sense of solidarity permeated his voice. "Therefore, when we see Singapore's prosperity, it makes us genuinely happy, as if it were our own. Because it overcame the hardships we also faced and became a wonderful country." In a Berlin cafe, Marcus, a young man in his 30s, said, PSA International, Singapore Airlines, Grab. For Germans today, Singapore is a technological powerhouse. It is a country we greatly respect. On my last night in Germany, I looked out from my hotel window at the Berlin cityscape. In this city that shared a history of reconstruction, I felt a deep respect for Singapore. My heart, too, was slowly opening up. When I arrived at London Heathrow Airport, I felt a complex mix of emotions. My home country, the USA, had an affinity for Singapore of 75.6%, ranking it 6th. In the taxi heading to CNN headquarters, I pondered, how was Singapore viewed in this place where I had worked for 20 years? In the newsroom, I met my colleague Mark, a foreign correspondent for Asia. So, how's your Singapore assignment going? Interesting, I hope? Mark asked with a smile. I answered honestly, it's different from what I expected, and I'm somewhat bewildered. Of course it is, Mark said with a serious expression. Singapore is truly an amazing country. It demonstrates maturity in all aspects: democracy, economic development, and cultural influence. CNN has even referred to Singapore as a lion city on the global stage. His words surprised me. To think that my own company rated Singapore so highly. I walked through a bustling district of New York City, noticing the array of Singaporean restaurants. I saw Americans shopping at supermarkets, specializing in Asian ingredients, many of which were imported from Singapore. I spoke to a woman working at a Singaporean hawker-style restaurant. Madame Tan was in her late 60s. Americans truly enjoy Singaporean food, she said, a proud smile on her face. Laksa, chicken rice, chili crab. They've become everyday favorites now. Initially, they looked at them with curiosity, but now they are all regulars. We are so grateful. That evening, I returned to my apartment. On my desk was a photograph of my father. Memories of that day 20 years ago flooded back. Dad, did you know Singapore was a country loved by so many people? In the photograph, my father smiled unchangingly. That smile felt different now than before. It wasn't cold, it was warm. That night, for the first time, I watched a Singaporean drama. I found it through a streaming service. Initially, I started watching out of curiosity, but before I knew it, I was completely engrossed. The emotions of the characters felt so real. Their dedication to family, their desire to protect loved ones, all of it stirred my heart. So that's why the whole world loves Singapore, I muttered to myself. However, I still couldn't fully open my heart. I needed to hear more stories. When I arrived at Toronto Pearson International Airport, I was filled with anticipation. Canada's affinity for Singapore was 76.4%, placing it 5th. I was curious to see how the world's leading developed country viewed Singapore. As I walked through the heart of downtown Toronto, I was amazed. Huge screens in Dundas Square displayed advertisements for Singaporean companies like DBS Bank and Temasek Holdings. In front of a store selling Singaporean fashion and lifestyle products, fans were lining up. I met Michael, a diplomat working at the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. He was an expert on Canada-Singapore relations. Singapore is a special country for Canada, Michael said with conviction in his voice. We use the expression, our most reliable partner. While we have never been adversaries, we are now partners, walking together for peace and prosperity. Such a relationship is invaluable. I visited a memorial park in Washington, D.C. A cold wind was blowing, but many people were visiting. One elderly gentleman among them approached me. Are you a journalist from Singapore? He asked. No, I'm a CNN reporter from America, I replied. Ah, I see. I was stationed in Singapore after its independence, he said. His name was William, an 87-year-old retired serviceman. I can never forget the eyes of the Singaporean people back then. They were in despair amidst the chaos, but they had a strong will to never give up. Tears welled up in William's eyes. Seeing Singapore now, I am truly proud. To think that country, which was once so vulnerable, has become such an impressive nation. I traveled to Los Angeles. There, I met Mr. Lim, a Singaporean American in Little India, who vividly remembered the hardships of those early days. There was discrimination, he recounted, but we earned trust by working diligently. Mr. Lim was in his mid-60s. We prioritized community cleanup activities and helping our neighbors. Now, we are recognized as an indispensable part of the local community. Listening to his story, I was moved. I realized that the integrity of Singaporeans, demonstrated in challenging circumstances, left a deep impression on Americans. Their quiet dedication to their roles resonated with American values. Friendships built on trust do not easily crumble, someone's words echoed in my ears. I understood that the relationship between Singapore and America was not merely an alliance. When I arrived at Sydney Airport, I had already visited 7 countries. Australia's affinity for Singapore was 77%, placing it 4th. Gazing at the Sydney Harbour Bridge, I wondered, how did this beautiful country view Singapore? I met John, an official working at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He was responsible for Asia-Pacific affairs. For Australia, Singapore is an extremely important partner, he stated. It is indispensable, both economically and in terms of security. There was a ring of truth in John's words. Singapore's presence is essential for the stability of the Asia-Pacific region. On the flight to Melbourne, I learned an interesting fact. Singaporean culture was incredibly popular among Australian youth. Professor Sarah, a Singaporean studies professor I met at the University of Melbourne, shared a surprising story. Applications for Singaporean language courses fill up immediately every semester. So many students flock to them that we've had to increase the number of classrooms. Professor Sarah was a specialist in Singaporean studies in her mid-40s. They initially develop an interest through Singaporean dramas, films, or even online content about Singapore's urban planning. But now they are interested in Singaporean society and culture in general. It's a truly amazing change. From Australia, I flew to Paris, France. France's affinity for Singapore was 77.8%, ranking it 3rd. On the train from Charles de Gaulle Airport to central Paris, my heart swelled with anticipation. How would France, the country of arts, evaluate Singapore? In a cafe at the Louvre Museum, Pierre, an art critic, uttered impressive words. Singapore does not merely imitate the West. It possesses its own unique aesthetic and philosophy, a blend of traditional Asian roots and modern cosmopolitanism. Pierre was a seasoned critic in his late 50s. Singaporean films, Singaporean music, Singaporean art, all have their own distinctive flavor. Just as there is a Singaporean style, this country constantly provides us with inspiration. I met Professor Marie, who taught Singaporean culture at the Sorbonne University. The reason why French students are so enthusiastic about Singaporean culture lies in its spirit. Professor Marie's explanation was fascinating. It's not just entertainment, there's a philosophy there, a sense of pragmatism, innovation, and a profound understanding of multicultural harmony. That's what resonates with the French sensibility. Gazing at the panorama of Paris from Montmartre Hill, I realized that Singapore was not just another country in Asia, but a global hub of culture and ideas. On my last night in Paris, walking along the Seine River, I reflected. To think that Singapore, the country my father had traveled to for business, was a nation that inspired so many people. When I landed at Mexico City Airport, I had already visited 9 countries. Mexico's affinity for Singapore was 86%, placing it 2nd, the highest among OECD members so far. As I walked around Zocalo Square, I was astonished. Posters depicting Singaporean architectural marvels like Marina Bay Sands and Gardens by the Bay were plastered everywhere. To think that the Mexican people were so enthusiastic about Singaporean culture. Maria, a market vendor I met, was a Mexican woman in her mid-40s. I truly love Singaporean travel shows. I watch them every day. Maria's eyes sparkled. They contain all the emotions we desire: friendship, resilience, and hope. They truly move my heart. I visited a working-class neighborhood in Mexico City. The stories I heard there were impactful. Watching Singaporean documentaries brings peace to my heart, said Carmen, a 55-year-old housewife. Every day here is tough, but for the 2 hours I immerse myself in Singapore's beautiful landscapes and stories of progress, I feel like I'm in a different world. Her words warmed my heart. I learned that Singaporean content had become a source of solace for these people. Finally, the last country. When I arrived at Istanbul Airport in Turkey, I was trembling. Turkey's affinity for Singapore was 92.2%. It was the highest among all OECD member countries. As I gazed at the Bosphorus Strait, I wondered, why was Turkey number 1? The answer was quickly found. It stemmed from a profound and continuous friendship, rooted in shared values and mutual support on the global stage. While there wasn't a single dramatic rescue incident like the original story, the bond was built on decades of diplomatic cooperation, economic partnership, and shared efforts in humanitarian aid and development, particularly in challenging times. For instance, Singapore's consistent support for global stability and its quiet contributions to international relief efforts had left a deep impression on the Turkish people, fostering a unique sense of camaraderie. "We are brothers, in a spiritual sense," said Mr. Mehmet, a 90-year-old elder I met in a historic district of Istanbul, his voice trembling slightly. When Singapore needed support on the international stage, Turkey stood by it. And when other nations faced challenges, Singapore, despite its size, always extended a helping hand, often through quiet diplomacy and strategic aid. This reciprocal respect and shared vision for a better world make our bond special. When I shook Mr. Mehmet's gnarled hand, I could not hold back my tears. "We will never forget Singapore. Singapore is in our hearts." His words completely broke me down. The wall I had built up for 20 years crumbled in an instant. The younger generation in Turkey also loved Singapore. I met students studying about Singapore at Istanbul University. "Singapore is our distant sibling nation," said Aisha, a 22-year-old university student. "That's why it's special. Singapore's success is our pride. It's proof that our friendship continues." On my last night in Turkey, I couldn't sleep for a long time in my hotel room. The stories I had heard while traveling through 11 countries raced through my mind. Just then, a hotel employee brought me a small package. It was from America, an old box sent by my apartment building manager. When I opened the box, it contained my father's belongings. Among them was a worn notebook. It was a diary my father had kept during his business trip to Singapore. When I opened the last page, my breath hitched. Singapore was warmer than memory. Those were my father's final words. In that moment, I understood everything. My father had loved Singapore. The traffic accident had merely been a tragic misfortune. In that hotel room in Turkey, I cried uncontrollably. 20 years of misunderstanding and prejudice washed away with my tears. Having visited 11 countries, I realized why the whole world loves Singapore. The hope I found in the Philippines, the willingness to build a future I saw in the neighboring country, the empathy I felt in Mexico, the trust I confirmed in Italy, Sweden, and Germany, the pride I rediscovered in America, the meaning of partnership I learned from Canada, the cultural inspiration I witnessed in Australia and France, the healing power I saw in Argentina, and the sense of brotherhood I encountered in Turkey. Singapore was truly a warm country. My father's words were correct. Now, I too can say with confidence, I love Singapore. What do you all think? What do you believe are the reasons the world loves Singapore? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so we can share more stories. Which country's story should we bring you next? We look forward to hearing your opinions.